Hi, I'm Dr. Jason Day, and today we're going to be sharing one of the most critical conversations in the world of pediatrics today. And this conversation wasn't just born out of countless hours of research and talking with other specialists all across this country. It's born out of conversations I've had with moms and with dads and parents just like you, parents desperate for answers, desperate for clarity, desperate for a blueprint or for an ounce of hope for their child to have not just a better day, but a better life. And you know what? In this conversation, I'm not just coming to you as a doctor, I'm coming to you as a dad. A little bit about me, I'm a pediatric and family chiropractor, but my claim to fame is I'm father to 5 amazing boys. But I want to talk about one of these boys specifically. His name's Silas. Yeah, he looks a little bit different. And obviously he was born into some different circumstances than my other children. He was adopted. And in that pregnancy, I can only imagine the stress this mother was experiencing to make the right decision. The emotional stressor she had to do to give up that child, I cannot fathom. But there was also some physical stressors. There were some birth interventions. And we're going to talk about these patterns that I've saw in these conversations with other parents, and not just my own child, but my child checked these boxes of stressors that kids are exposed to on an all too common basis. And my child, not just patients, but my child went through this. And he had that neurological disconnect. He was going down that path, and I knew that needed to be stopped. He needed the plan just as much. So I'm not just coming to you as a doctor, I'm coming to you as a dad. And what I love about this conversation is we don't have to have soapboxes. We're not here to give you an opinions. There's plenty of opinions. Just go on social media, you get those. But here's the facts. Here's the facts facing our pediatric population today. It is a fact that 1 in 38 boys have autism. 1 in 9 children have asthma. 1 in 6 children will be learning disabled. 1 in 5 children have a defined mental disorder, and 1 in 4 children have a chronic illness. And I find it interesting, it's not humorous, but it is interesting that we see these outbreaks in the coronavirus, the SARS virus, the measles outbreak. And I remember just a few years ago, 19 children in California came down with a whooping cough. I'm a father, I get it. I would be terrified if my child had the whooping cough. I'm not making light of that, but it made national news that 19 children had the whooping cough. Not 1 in 19, just 19. The numbers that I just shared with you are facts, and they are epidemic proportions. But what is shifting out there? The idea that our genetics are driving all this is absurd. How much of our genetics changed in the last 10,000 years, much less the last 30? And the fact that 1 in 38 boys have autism, that's in every classroom almost. And I want to get the support and the research for these children, but I also want to find out why are we seeing such significant rises, meteoric rises in these challenges. And that's what this conversation is all about. Another name for this workshop is called the perfect storm, and there is a perfect storm of stressors that every single one of our children, so many kids, are facing. There's millions of stressors out there, but they really fall under 3 categories. The first type of stress is a physical type of stressor or a trauma. We call them the 3 T's. Now, where could that happen? It can happen in utero. Birth trauma is quite possibly the most overlooked childhood epidemic facing kids today. We're going to spend much more time on that in the very near future, but we will come back to that. There's been vacuum extractions. They're still using forceps, car seats that are used way too often, baby Bjorns. You know what? Some of the cutest photos on Facebook today is that chubby baby in a bumbo seat. And I get it, it's cute, but it's not cute what it's doing to their neurology. In fact, if you force a child into a seated position and they can't sit on their own, we're putting undue pressure on their spine and their nervous system. And there's slips and falls. You know what? I'm father to 5 amazing boys, and I jokingly say they daily try to kill themselves. So those are the physical types of stressors that are pushing and pushing and pushing it on our child's brain and neurology. The second type of stressor, the second T, is toxins, chemical stressors. And this is where a lot of people are like, oh, here comes the soapbox moment. Well, yes, we'll hint about vaccines, we'll talk about those, but there's so many more stressors out there that our kids are facing. Preservatives in our food, pesticides, processed foods, sugar, grains, and dairy, the hallmark of the Western inflammation diet. Environmental chemicals are absolutely everywhere. Pitocin has actually shown a correlation to sensory types of challenges. Epidurals, antibiotics, and vaccines. And the reason I include this in the conversation is I've sat across the table from a mom who know that they went away, their spirit went away, but I also take care of a medical doctor that administers vaccine, and her daughter unfortunately had a bad reaction to one of the vaccines. She does not have autism, and in no way, shape, or form am I saying vaccines cause autism, but for some kids, it can be a stressor. Her child happened to develop seizures immediately during that vaccination, and afterwards, it's well documented. But to tell that mom, to tell that medical doctor that that vaccine had nothing to do with her child's irritation and injury is a bit insensitive. And you know what? I'm not anti-peanut either, but I'm open to the idea that maybe, just maybe, peanuts aren't okay for everybody. And I think if we bring a little sympathy and understanding into that conversation, we might bore out some better research there. The third type of stressor is emotional stressors, or thoughts. And a lot of times it begins with that stressful, fear-based pregnancy. Now, everybody that's watching this video probably has a book somewhere in their attic or on their shelves that they got when they found out they were expecting. You know what that book is, What to Expect When You're Expecting. Does anybody out there know who the author is? I jokingly say it's Stephen King because it's by far the most scary novel I've ever read in my entire life. It catalogs everything that's going to go wrong with your pregnancy and why you should freak out about it. And then you go talk to a well-intentioned friend or family member and they tell you how horrible their pregnancy was, how painful their birth was. And in fact, we live in a society that's not supportive of women. We treat pregnancy as if it's a pathology. How many tests can we do? How fast can we get this baby out? How many chemicals can we pump into this situation to bring this baby out of the situation? But let's say that didn't happen. A lot of times they're stressful for us, emergency C-sections, NICU stays, but we live a fast-paced, high-stress lifestyle. And a lot of these kids, beautiful, amazing, creative children, they're different. And they get noticed and they might get bullied. They might get ostracized, even by well-intentioned teachers. A teacher cannot take care of 25 kids with sensory challenges. So a lot of times these kids get marginalized, not just in the classroom, but in society. So you have these three types of stressors: physical, chemical, emotional, just pushing and pushing and pushing in. At some point, the brain cannot process all that. It can't deal with that. So it kicks into the fight or flight spectrum, the sympathetic spectrum. This is the spectrum of spectrum challenges. One of the most major misunderstandings in society is that we think these kids are somehow disconnected from their senses, that we don't know exactly what sensory challenges are. We know exactly what it is, and we know exactly what's causing it. It's not one thing. It's a myriad. It's a perfect storm of stressors that these kids are getting bombarded with every single day, sometimes in utero, sometimes even birth. They aren't even 5 minutes old, and they've been exposed to all these different types of stressors. There's so many stressors the body can take care of before it leads to this neurological disconnect. The medical term, the health term for disconnect is subluxation. And I genuinely don't care if you remember that term, subluxation, but you need to know what to look for. There are signs. There are clues to this subluxation. And what is that? What would you see in your child or your baby? And this is where we start to take that look back into the history. And we see this in our child. We saw it in our pregnancy. But if you had a traumatic birth, a birth that involved interventions, again, may have been absolutely necessary, but that is all but a guarantee for subluxation. Plagiocephaly is the fancy term for their head being misshapen or asymmetry. Difficulty nursing or torticollis if their head is stuck out to the side. Ear infections, reflux, colic, constipation. These are all boxes that we're checking. And again, I'm not just checking these as a doctor. I'm checking them as a dad. My child, my Silas, had torticollis. His head was stuck out to the side and rotated. His head was misshapen. He had plagiocephaly. And within just a few short weeks of that traumatic birth, his right eye was tracking. I could show you the photos, every single photo, here, misshapen head and eye. As a dad, I went through this. That is not a neck issue. That's not a muscle issue. It's not an eye issue. It's a neurological brain disconnect. This is the same disconnect, the stress that leads to that fight or flight response that gets a child's brain and neurology stuck there. What are some other challenges you might have seen in your child? Sitting or crawling challenges. If you think about it, crawling is a very coordinated activity. And again, like the bumbo seat, you might have that cute video of a child sitting kind of Indian style and scooting across the floor with their legs. It is cute, but it's not okay. It's not neurologically cute. That means their brain and neurology is not working in a coordinated way. There's spasms, there's hypertonicity. Sometimes there's weakness and poor posture, poor balance and coordination. These poor kids have bumps and bruises their entire lifetime because they're constantly running into it. You know, there's a brilliant quote from a brilliant man. His name's Dr. Bruce Lipton. He's a PhD stem cell biologist. He says that the function of the nervous system is to perceive the environment and coordinate the behavior of all other cells. That's a pretty loaded definition, but if you think about it, how well does a child with autism perceive his environment? Not too well. How well does a child with sensory processing disorder coordinate anything? So if your child has an issue with perception or coordination, it has to, by definition, be rooted in neurology. So we're going to be diving deep into this nerdy neurological discussion, and you know what? I hold nothing back. I hold none of the science back because I have discovered if parents could receive credit hours for the amount of time they've researched these issues, they'd have a double PhD by now. In fact, so many of these parents have researched and studied more than the doctors trying to help them. So we've talked about the 3 T's, the 3 different types of stressors. Let's talk about that neurological impact. What happens when these dominoes start to falling. The first type of neurological impact is due to a physical disconnect. It's called dyskinesia. Dys meaning abnormal, kinesia meaning movement. And this isn't just a conversation that pediatric chiropractors are having. Dr. Godfrey Gutman, a medical doctor, a doctor that delivered babies, did some research because he saw these patterns as well years ago. And in his research, he discovered that almost 80% of births were traumatic to that child, which had a direct and immediate impact on the neurology, immune system, and digestive system. But why would that happen? And why are we checking these boxes? If you think about it, the fight or flight response is actually a good thing. Your body may need it sometimes. If you think of a caveman a long time ago, if I'm running from a bear, how important is it that I digest breakfast if I'm about to be breakfast? So things like colic, constipation, reflux, these are all, yes, digestive symptoms with a neurological cause. How important is it to fight a cold, an ear infection, or a virus if I'm about to fight a bear? The immune system and digestive system require a lot of energy and focus. So if I'm running from a bear, I don't need to be battling these other things. So things like ear infections, asthma, allergies, colic, constipation, do a survey. They've done them. Surveys of the autistic community, the anxiety community, the sensory community, exponentially higher. And you know what? If a picture's worth 1,000 words, a video is worth 1,000,000 more. I want you to see this physical disconnect that can happen at birth at a literal whistle while you work C-section. Let's check out this video.
Oh, there you go, little fella.
Come on, buddy.
All right.
Now what you're going to see on this video is a number of things. There's physical stressors that this baby's going to encounter. You're going to see them pulling the head left, right, and then they traction that baby out unsupported. This was an easy one. This wasn't a traumatic emergency C-section. That was easy for those doctors, but how easy is it for that baby? And as if that physical neurological assault on that child's brainstem was not enough, in record time that other doctor comes in and clamps that cord. Did you know that the umbilical cord continues to pump for about 20 minutes after a baby's born? Everything in the body happens for a very intelligent reason. Sometimes we try and bypass that, but why would that cord continue to pump? What is it pumping? Blood, nutrients, intestinal flora for that child. It's that first meal for that baby, because does a mother's milk come in immediately? Of course not, but no big deal. It got this gigantic meal except for that child. But what do we twist and torque on that baby? It's not just a ligament, a tendon, or a muscle. That's a brainstem. We live our lives through this thing called the nervous system. To stress that baby out is a huge deal. We've set that child out on a path of neurological disconnect. It is not a stretch to think that child is in fight or flight. And again, what happens during fight or flight? Our senses heighten, our muscle tension goes up, our digestion, immune system, and sleep turns off. Do you think it's a stretch to think that child's in fight or flight? How well is that child going to sleep that night? How well is that child going to digest anything? Do you think their neck might be misaligned? Do you think their palate might be damaged to where they can't nurse and latch properly? The hormones might be surging. It's not a stretch to think that this child is in fight or flight, that their senses heightened. They're in complete sensory overload. We have a spine and a brainstem that's been twisted and torqued and stretched. Did you know, the medical literature tells us this, the average C-section puts upwards of 50 to 60 pounds of pulling on a baby's neck and brainstem. That's not my opinion. That's not a soapbox. That's a medical fact. There's research to back that up. But let's think about that, because some people say, well, you know, babies are flexible. If I ask to hold your newborn child and I simply pick that child up by their head with no other support, mama bear is going to come out, because that's a physical and neurological assault on that child. But what if I put a 50-pound weight on their ankles and then lifted them up? It's not a stretch to think that these kids are overwhelmed. And I'm not looking back with regret on C-section interventions. C-sections save lives. We have to deal with the aftermath. We have to deal with the stress and irritation and damage that could have happened to that child. And movement in the spine is not only good for flexibility, it actually charges our brain's batteries. The medical term for it is proprioception. But when you get a neck that's twisted, torqued, and irritated, that proprioception is cut off. And all these stressful nociception messages start bombarding the brain. Which brings us to our next D, disaffrontation. Affrontation is the conversation between body and brain, and you better believe that baby and a lot of our kids' bodies are stressed. They've had the physical, the chemical, the emotional stressors. That message has to get to the brain. That is that balance between proprioception and nociception. The spine alone is responsible for over 60% of all those proprioceptive healing messages to the brain. That tiny little spot that you saw twisted and torqued and pulled 50 to 60 pounds of pressure is over a third of all proprioception going into the brain. And if you need another visual for this, this is an actual picture a dad took. He's one of those brave dads that reached around the curtain and took a picture of his child being pulled out of his wife's womb there. And you can see the stress and the torque, the damage that could be done to the TMJ, the brainstem, is truly overwhelming. So all those messages start to hit the brain, which leads us to our third D, dysautonomia. And man, we could spend a month talking about this. The autonomic nervous system, that's the automatic parts of you. The autonomic nervous system controls the organs, the glands, the blood vessels, our energy, our emotions, our focus, a lot to do with our emotions, so many other pieces to this puzzle. And dysautonomia is a state of imbalance between that brain and body. It's as if this gigantic gas pedal is being revved and the brakes have been cut. And in fact, one of the best descriptors of that neurological assault, that neurological overwhelm that is the sensory processing disorder, I heard this from a neurologist one time. He said it's as if they have this Ferrari brain and bicycle brakes. Which brings us to our next D, dysponesis. And I know that's kind of a big, wordy word, but I want to break down this definition. Dysponesis is defined as a reversible, physiological state consisting of unnoticed, misdirected neurophysical reactions to various agents, which include environmental events, bodily sensations, emotions, and thoughts, and the repercussions of these throughout the entire organism. I know that's one of those big medical dictionary definitions, but think about it. What is the organism? It's your child. And what that definition states is that any type of environmental event, what is that? An itchy tag, a light that's too bright, a sound that's too noisy, a restaurant that's just way too over the top. Their senses are heightened. And again, we'll go back to that caveman analogy. Think of a caveman running from a bear. My senses being heightened is a good thing. I need to be able to see better, hear better. That sense of touch goes through the roof that helps me balance better. But imagine if that volume is turned up and stuck on up for an entire day, an entire month, an entire life. It's overwhelming. Their brain cannot process that sensory input. That's how we arrived at the diagnosis of sensory processing disorder, which is another word for ADHD. We see it in ADD, we see it in anxiety, we see it in kids that just can't sit still. Very intelligent kids that struggle to do well in math. It can show up as so many different symptoms, but it's all rooted in a brain and nervous system that's stuck in fight or flight. Which brings us to the final D, disconnected kids. And this is not just where my brain and attention is, it's where my heart is, because I see families being torn apart. And in fact, in a recent government survey, they discovered that divorce rates in families dealing with autism, it's over 80%. And the fact that so many classrooms are full of kids with ADHD, I love these children. They're some of the most creative, compassionate, energetic kids on the planet. But the class just can't contain them, so they try to. And they get marginalized. We see them struggling in school, struggling emotionally, struggling physically. They're taking medications that depress them and suppress them. And not just suppress their energy, they suppress their spirit. And we have to take a closer and a hard look, and we have to ask the tough questions, because the fact is even the medical world is waking up to this. And according to the physician's desk reference, a lot of these powerful antipsychotic medications, they just haven't been tested for the safety and efficacy longer than a duration of 6 months. And in fact, there's a suicidal risk with a lot of antidepressants. And the physician's desk reference said this: anyone considering the use of antidepressants in a child, adolescent, or young adults must balance the risk of suicidality with clinical need. In a recent New York Times article, it was discovered that 1 in 5 high school-age boys have been diagnosed with ADHD. Sales of Adderall have more than doubled over a 5-year period. And a recent government survey found that 30% of these drugs were being misused and abused by people that didn't even have a prescription. Again, you can't abuse something that's good for you. And that survey was done years ago. It's only gotten worse since then. Actually, in a recent article by a scientific journalist, Donna Jackson Nakazawa, I wanted to share this piece with you because she describes so perfectly and quite possibly unintentionally everything that your child is living through right now. Donna Jackson Nakazawa had a horrible experience as a child, and I quote her. She was a daddy's girl, and at age 13, she came home to find an ambulance in her driveway pulling her dad off on a gurney, and it was her words that said this: "That was the day my childhood ended." Nothing physically happened to her. She didn't take any medications or was exposed to environmental toxins. She had an emotionally traumatic event. And not only did her childhood end, her health started to tank. And within a few short months, she started developing allergies and asthma and was sick all the time due to that emotional overwhelm. And by the time she was in her 20s, she was literally dying Not just having a bad day, but dying of an autoimmune disorder. And the most ultimate quote from this entire conversation, she kept digging, and she kept digging because she had access to the best medications in the world, and she was getting sicker. So sick that she wished she was dead. But here's what she said in her final paragraph of her research. She said that my physician explained that ongoing adversity in childhood leads to a chronic state of fight, flight, or freeze. And researchers at Yale had recently shown that when inflammatory stress hormones flood a child's body and brain, they alter the genes. Not just the moment, they alter the genetic expression that oversee our stress reactivity, resetting that stress response to high for life. This increased the risk of inflammation, which manifests later in cancer, heart disease, and autoimmune diseases like mine. That was her quote. That was what she went through. So the future of so many kids and teenagers and adults that are stuck in this fight or flight, it may be autoimmunity, it may be cancer, it might be heart disease, but the right now, a brain that's stuck in the right now of fight or flight, this is the spectrum of spectrum challenges. And again, we can dig deeper. A research paper that just came out last July from the University of Wisconsin in Madison, they were actually researching the very horrible experience of shaken baby syndrome. And they were looking at the physical trauma on that child's brainstem and brain and seeing how that affected them down the road. And they discovered, without question, black and white research showed us that their genetic expression, their genes were changed. Again, not just their muscles, not just their ligaments, not just their tendons, the genetic expression of these children was changed for the rest of their lives. Now, this might be the most controversial part of this talk, but I'll go there. Some of my friends and family are OBGYNs, and I love the work they do. They save lives, but tell me the difference between a drunk dad shaking a brainstem and pulling in 60 or 70 pounds on a brainstem with forceps. Again, of course, intent is radically different. Legality is radically different, but the impact it has on that child's brainstem and neurology, it's hard to discern the difference because there is a stress, there is a trauma that can damage neurology. Intent doesn't matter. Damage is damage. So we've been talking about this thing called the perfect storm, this whole myriad of stressors that starts knocking these dominoes down that leads to disconnected kids. It is a perfect storm. And the forecast for this perfect storm is autism. It's ADHD, it's sensory challenges, it's anxiety, it's kids being disconnected. It's allergies, it's chronic illness, it's asthma. There's so many different things. And quite often it begins right at the beginning with a fear and intervention-based pregnancy. And with all that fear and intervention, it can lead to that birth injury or that neurological disconnect we call subluxation. How well do you think that child, that baby that we saw in the video, is going to sleep that night? How well do you think their digestive system is going to work? Because that leads to colic. That leads to digestive challenges. And what do we do with colic? We don't sleep too well. And a lot of times when that immune system starts to taint because the neurology is tanked, that leads to chronic ear infections. And what do we do for chronic ear infections? For some crazy reason, we still prescribe antibiotics to that. This is not my opinion. According to the Pediatric Society of America, in the early 1980s, when I was just a little kid, they overwhelmingly agreed that antibiotics do not help with ear infections. Most of them are viral. They actually set the child up for immune system failure. So the gut is the most neurologically rich area of the body, other than the brain and the nervous system. So we're stressing out that immune system. We're stressing out the gut, that neurologically rich area, even more by taking countless rounds of antibiotics. Antibiotics are still the #1 prescribed medication in all of pediatrics for ear infections, and it makes absolutely no sense. There's upwards of 70+ vaccinations still today. Some kids can get away with it. Some kids have immunity. Some do fine. Some don't. But let's put vaccines aside. That's 72 times in a lifetime. But how many meals a day do we eat? 3 at least. And a lot of times this toxic food and environment leads to this overwhelm. So we pushed and we pushed and we pushed, and we've led to this neurological disconnect that leaves our kids disconnected, sometimes, God forbid, a lifetime. And I'm not just here to share fear and scare tactics. I want to share some hope with you guys today. And I want to share a story about a little kid named Evan. And his history was so much like the kids we've taken care of. So often I've sat across the table from these moms and dads and asked these questions about their birth process. And Evan was lodged in the birth canal. He was stuck, so he was rushed away for an emergency C-section. And immediately after that birth, and we don't have to watch that video again, but he had that stressful birth just like him, but Evan was twitching. And what does twitching look like to a medical doctor or to a chiropractor or to a parent? It's a seizure. It looked like a seizure, so they ran every possible test. And here's some of the pictures from the first few moments of his life. When he should have been bonding with his mother right at her chest, he was stuck on a slab. He was attached to countless wires trying to figure out What is wrong with Evan? Why is he having seizures? What are these challenges? And for about a week to 10 days, they could not figure this out, and magically, they went away. And a year went by. 2 years went by. 3.5 years gone by, and at this point, Evan's still not talking. And Mom knew something was wrong, and she knew it for years because he was unable to follow directions, little to no eye contact, incredibly emotional, and diagnosed with autism by the specialist in her area. And her doctor said something to her that troubles me. He said, you need to get comfortable with the idea that he's going to need to be institutionalized, not just for his safety, but for yours. But his mother used a word to describe her son that haunts me to this day. And as a doctor with my understanding and background in neurology, I get it, but as a dad, it breaks my heart. She described her son as vacant. When she looked in her son's eyes, she saw vacancy. When she pried in and tried to connect with him emotionally, vacant, disconnect. And that was the life of Evan for 3.5 years. And if a picture's worth 1,000 words, a video's worth so much more. Watch this video of a day in the life of Evan.
Bye, Aunt Kristen. See you later.
No.
No? Did you have fun? Did you have fun? Yes? Yes? Do you love Aunt Kristen? Say yes. Yeah? What? Bye, Aunt Kristen.
What you see in this video is a mom desperately trying to connect with her child. And this wasn't just a bad moment. I have 5 boys. I've had 3.5 years olds before. Sometimes days can be difficult. This was not a day. This was not a bad week. This was every single day of his life. And you see the certain speech patterns. You see his black eye. He was constantly falling down. You know, when I first started doing this work, I thought, how frustrating and challenging this is for moms and for dads. How challenging is it for a professional like an OT, a speech therapist, or even a chiropractor to help these kids? And then it dawned on me, how terrifying is this for Evan? To not have context, to not have an understanding, to not have any idea of what a good day is, to not know what good sleep is, to not know what a bloated stomach doesn't feel like, to not have an immune system that works for you instead of always working against you. How terrifying is it to not know what a good day is or even understand the concept of it? But when it comes to Evan's health, when it comes to your child's health, we're never going to guess. We measure these things every step of the way. And there's a state-of-the-art technology that can tap in to that neurological system that is at the heart of all of these challenges. No matter the diagnosis, sensory challenges, autism, ADHD, anxiety, we want to get to the root of it all and the heart of it all, and that's neurology. One of the scans we did, and we'll show this one to you, is called thermography. Thermography measures the temperature all along that nerve root level. We expect and hope that temperature to be about the same. With any inflammation, irritation, stress, disconnect, it's going to show up as those red bars or those blue bars. You can look at Evan's scan here. It does not take a rocket scientist, a neurologist, or a chiropractor to look at that and say, that's messed up. Look at those gigantic red bars by the brainstem and by the gut. We see the disconnect that we've been talking about in this entire video. And again, we never guess. We measure these things. And we began a process of care. And I know you might be wondering, what the heck is that? Well, the purpose of an adjustment, a very gentle, specific, neurologically focused adjustment, is all back to that term proprioception, is that movement stimuli into the brainstem, into the brain, releasing that irritation so that your child, so that Evan and my child has a chance to adapt. And after 2 weeks, I want to share Evan's results here. He fell asleep in the parking lot and did not wake up for 15 hours. Now again, you're thinking, oh my gosh, that's a long time. Yes, he hadn't slept too well in 3.5 years. 15 hours at that point was a nap. He began talking more within days of this proprioceptive adjustment, imitating speech for the first time, playing with his brothers and sisters and parents, doing funny things to engage his parents. And he actually started pooping a ton and developed a fever. Why did I throw that one in there? Well, think about it. His immune system is waking up. His digestive system is waking up. His brain is finally doing its job. He had to eliminate those toxins. It was an amazing thing to see. And again, if a picture's worth 1,000 words, here's a video of Evan just after 2 months of care.
Is that a bird? Tweet, tweet. What's that one?
This is the same child.
What is it?
I don't even have to play the audio. But we could also see, you can see the different light in his eyes. He's talking more. He's engaged more. He's smiling more. That vacancy, gone. He's connected. He's healthy. He's healing. And today, as Evan is fully back on track, he's speaking in full sentences, exploding with development, sleeping better, potty trained, never sick, completely back on track because he's connected. And I will say this, I didn't treat Evan's autism. I don't treat ADHD. I don't treat sensory challenges. What we do is we take a detailed neurological focus and we adjust those things and step back and watch your child unlock, unfold a miracle right in front of our eyes, because that potential is in every child. They're not missing anything. And this message of hope and healing, it's not just for Evan. It's not just for my child. It's not just for autism. We help so many different kids. And at the heart of so many of these challenges, whether they're sensory challenges, struggling in school, anxiety, ADHD, they're all rooted in neurology. And when we remove those neurological stressors, it opens the opportunity. It opens the brain to do its job. Here's an amazing testimony from a cool kid in our practice. Awesome parents, awesome home life, but man, this kid struggled. He struggled just to do barely okay in school. And we knew he had it in him. And this is the day he brought in his report card into our practice. Straight A's, perfect grades. He could not have been happier. And I couldn't have either. Here's another kid. He's a kid of a pastor at a local church. And his story is perfectly unique. He had sensory processing challenges. And this kid had a crippling fear of bugs and being outside. It was just too overwhelming for his nervous system that was so stuck in fight or flight. And as you can see, they love camping. This couple used to go camping all the time as a couple, but they had to forfeit that idea because of Gavin just being terrified of going outside. This is a picture of one of their first camping trips, but before this, the sensation of grass on his toes would send him into an anxiety or panic attack. If he saw a bug, he would fall into the fetal position and cry for hours. Again, that wasn't a fear of bugs issue. That wasn't a grass issue. That was a neurological overwhelm issue. Here's another one of my favorite practice members. And she just recently, this is her scans here, by the way, and they just celebrated by going to one of the circuses locally. And it was always her dream to go to the circus, but she tried that when she was 5. It was one of the worst decisions in her life because the overwhelm that is the circus led to a panic attack that basically took about a week to unwind. She lived her life in that sensory disconnect. But all the science we've been discussing, all the strategies we're talking about here, it's not just for Evan or a Gavin or my Silas. It's for your child. It's for your family. It's for your future, because when we live a life of connection, neurological connection, that is a life of unbridled potential. That is the hope I want to extend to you today. But if I'm being honest, hope, it's an amazing thing, but it's not a strategy. I'm tired of meeting parents stuck in hope. I'm tired of meeting parents stuck in frustration. I'm tired of children trying to just sticking with this coping strategies for the rest of their life. I don't want your children to cope. I want your children to have the opportunity to heal. And that's the opportunity we're extending you today. That examination with thermography, it doesn't end there. We also utilize a state-of-the-art technology developed by neurologists called a surface EMG technology. It basically measures the energy and noise on that muscular system, which is controlled by the nerves. We also use heart rate variability. It's not a cardiovascular scan. If you're a nerd like me, Google heart rate variability in Harvard. They just did some research on this. It is the medical standard for measuring that sympathetic fight or flight response. So we're looking at the irritation and inflammation. We're looking at the stress, tension, and noise on that brain and neurology, and then we're looking at the sympathetic response. When it comes to your child's health, we're never going to guess. We're going to measure these things, and it's perfectly safe. It's non-invasive. There's no x-rays or radiation. But without doubt, reservation, we can tell you exactly what's going on with your child's neurology, what you need to do about it, how long it'll take, and how much it'll cost. You've had their eyes checked, their ears checked, and their teeth checked. Why on earth have we not checked their neurology and their nerve system, which is at the heart of every single one of these challenges? So again, I'm extending that offer to you today. I'm sure you have questions. That makes you an amazing parent. I'm here for you. If you live in another part of the country or the world, I'm here for you. I'm here to help. I will help you find a doctor. But act now, act today. Ask those questions today. Reach out to us with the information provided below, and we will get you those answers. We will get you that blueprint so that you live a better today, a better week, and a better tomorrow for your child and for your family.